Welcome into Locked On Phillies. In today's episode, we're going to talk about the spring of one Zack Wheeler and why you shouldn't be too concerned with the struggles he's been having down in Clearwater, the most underrated role player on the Philadelphia Phillies team right now, and a little bit of update on the World Baseball Classic. We'll discuss all that and more on today's Locked On Phillies.
You are Locked On Phillies, your daily Philadelphia Phillies podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, this is Locked On Phillies. I'm your host, Connor Thomas. Been talking Phillies baseball for years over on the radio, 97.5 The Fanatic, NBC Sports Philadelphia on the TV, former collegiate and semi-pro baseball pitcher. Happy to be here with you as your host of Locked On Phillies. Want to thank you for making today, or Locked On Phillies, your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast, YouTube, Odyssey app, all that good stuff. Today's episode is brought to you by Ultimate Baseball GM. Brand new sponsor of ours. Let me tell you about them real quick. I'll tell you a little bit more later on in the episode. But if you've ever dreamed of becoming an MLB GM and managing your baseball franchise, then this game is definitely for you. To download the game, just visit ultimatebaseballgm.com or look it up on the app stores. Our listeners, they get a 100% free boost. So that's you. You get a 100% free boost to your franchise when using the promo Locked On. Make sure you put it in all caps, Locked On, in the game. So go ahead and check that out, and I'll tell you more about them a little bit later. But now I want to tell you a little bit about Zack Wheeler. Now, Wheeler has been struggling in spring training. He hasn't looked good. It's factual. He just hasn't had a really good spring. And guess what? That is okay. I get a lot of comments and have a lot of questions from people on the YouTube or on Twitter. What's going on with Zack Wheeler? I'm concerned with Zack Wheeler, this, that, and the other thing. He doesn't look like he's pitching well. He doesn't look all that good. Okay, here's a reason why you have a right to be slightly, very, very, very slightly concerned. Last year, he had problems with the throwing arm later on in the season to the point where he got shut down. Even in the playoffs, up until that last start, there were questions about, does he have the velocity still? Is he withstanding everything? Is he overcoming the dead arm? Then that final game happened, and he looked pretty darn good against the Houston Astros in the final game of the World Series. So you're looking at a situation there where that should basically calm you down a little bit to the fact that when you need him in a big spot, Zack Wheeler's going to deliver. But I get it. He had arm problems last year. He had a shoulder issue in spring training last year. He had a lot of innings on his body and on his arm after the Phillies run to the World Series. Even though he was shut down for the time he was late on in the season, it was still a long season for Zack Wheeler. And listen, that can pay, you can pay a price for that. We talked about that yesterday when we talked about Ranger Suarez and what's going on with his forearm tightness and everything there. And now that's something that could be a concern for the Phillies pitching staff in general, for the guys that were here last year and guys that had like career highs in innings during that World Series run. So I get that. I don't think this is that. I really don't. If it is, one, he'll get it stretched out and he'll be okay. And at points in the season, or for most of the season, I'd be willing to wager Zack Wheeler is going to be fine. But what's way more likely is this just one of those spring training performances. You know what? Let me tell you about Dylan Cease, who's pitching for the Chicago White Sox. He's a really good pitcher in the American League, a guy that's in the conversation that may be considered for an American League Cy Young Award this year. He had an outing where he gave up 11 runs, 6 homers, 4 walks, in 2/3 of an inning. That's awful. That's like unbelievably bad. All-time bad inning there. You shouldn't be like, oh, well, does he stink at pitching now? Does Dylan Cease, is he awful? Should he get sent down to AAA to start? No, guys. Sometimes you just have a couple bad outings in spring training, one bad outing. You're working on stuff. You're doing different things. I know it's a cop-out to just immediately go to the, oh, he's working on stuff excuse, but that's way more likely than Zack Wheeler to having to have just forgotten how to pitch. He's going to be fine. It's very, very rare. In fact, I can't even think of an instance. Maybe you'll be able to help me out, because I know people love when I say something wrong to help me out and help me get the right answer. So I appreciate it. But I can't even think of an instance where there's a Cy Young caliber pitcher, like a guy that's undoubtedly an ace at the major league level, that just in the prime of his career forgets how to pitch, that just has a terrible year. Like, it doesn't happen. It doesn't really happen to position players. It doesn't really happen to starting pitchers. It can happen to relievers because they have less innings and it's harder to get. Like if you throw 2 innings a week, 2 bad innings are awful. If you have 2 starts a week, well, 2 bad innings could be, I don't know, 2 great starts. So there's just so much sample size and he's so consistently good, this being Zack Wheeler, that he's not going to have like a terrible year. So don't take that out of your mind. It's not happening. It's absolutely not going to be the case. Now, like I said before, he could have a year where his arm backs up a little bit because of the extra workload from last season and the issues we saw pop up during last year. But I think a lot of people are overreacting when it comes to what Zack Wheeler is doing down in Clearwater. Clearwater doesn't matter. It absolutely does not matter. So try and do your best to watch the games. I know I'm being slightly a hypocrite here because I've talked about all this stuff, how Brandon Marsh swing looks like this year, and Alec Bohm looks like he's adding a little bit of power to his game. And these guys are having great springs. And could this guy make the roster? Or could that guy get called up at this point in the season? And I take a lot of positive feedback from spring training. And now this point of negative feedback on Zack Wheeler, I'm like, oh, well, don't even worry about it. If it was Taijuan Walker, if it was Bailey Falter, if it was Connor Brogdon, if it was, I don't know, Josh Harrison, that'd be a different story. Wheeler's just been so consistently good for the entire time he's been with the Philadelphia Phillies. I find it hard to believe he's just completely dropped off. It's much more likely that he's working on stuff. It's slightly more likely that he's got some issues just working through stretching out from last season, which was a very long season. And the least likely thing is Zack Wheeler just stinks now. Take it easy. We're going to laugh at this when we look back about a month into the season and say, hey, remember when Zack Wheeler had a couple bad appearances down in Clearwater and we thought that he might be in for a rough season? He might be in for a rough season by his standards, which would still be, I don't know, a number 2 pitcher on basically every team in baseball. Zack Wheeler is going to be fine. I promise you. I'm not concerned at all with anything like that. If you are, maybe you'll be able to laugh at me at some point in the season and say I'm crazy if Zack Wheeler has a rough season, but I don't see it happening. I wouldn't be concerned about it. I've seen him throw. I mean, he looks like he's not that he's uncomfortable or anything. Doesn't look like he's nursing any type of injury. I haven't heard anything like that from the Phillies, short of it being like a physical deficiency, meaning he's got dead arm, meaning he's got soreness in his elbow or shoulder or something like that. Something's bothering him. Something's nagging him. The fingernail issue that he had a couple years back. Short of it being anything like that pops up that we hear about, I wouldn't be worried about Zack Wheeler at all. Let him work through the spring. Let him get stretched out for opening day. And then when you get to the point where you're ready to go, then we start evaluating. And then after like 3 weeks, if his first 3 starts don't go well, we'll say, okay, maybe we got a Zack Wheeler problem. But right now, it's way too early to be making that determination on anybody who's proven to be great at the major league level. And Zack Wheeler has absolutely proven to be great at the major league level. So again, don't be concerned. Don't lose your mind over Zack Wheeler's pitching performance this spring. Let's see what he does when we get into late March, when the games count, April and May, to see how he starts off his season. Now, coming up, I just talked about a guy who's been proven to be great at the major league level. Well, the Phillies have a couple guys who are going to be important pieces on this team that haven't proven to be great at the major league level, proven to be okay, proven to be good. But if one of these guys breaks out, how much better does it make the Phillies? Let's talk about the role players on the team and which one is most poised for a breakout season, because there's a guy that's very interesting to me that I've talked about a couple times, and another one when I had this conversation on 97.5 The Fanatic this morning that a couple of my coworkers brought up. So we'll discuss as we continue Locked on Phillies. All right, let me tell you about one of our newest sponsors, and you got to check this out. It's called Ultimate Pro Baseball GM. You ever dreamed of being Dave Dombrowski? You ever dreamed of being Sam Fold? You ever dreamed of being one of those guys that sits in the front office and takes care of the operations of a baseball team and signs players and hires coaches and gets sponsors and makes trades and puts a team out on the field that can compete for a championship? Well, you have to go ahead and check out Ultimate Pro Baseball GM. They're absolutely awesome. You can do everything. Like everything that you would do as a regular GM or a president of baseball operations of a baseball team, you can go ahead and get it done, from hiring the right coaches and staff to managing team finances, scouting and drafting players, navigating your franchise through free agency, the ups and downs of a season, all that good stuff. It's not easy, which is good, because you don't want to. Sometimes when games put together realistic, like front office things, it's okay. You can make a couple trades and you can sign a couple players and that's it. And then you just simulate through the rest and whatever. Now, you can sim through stuff that you don't really want to do in this game as well. You're not required to make every last move, but you have the opportunity to. And it brings in all these players, and you can scout international players. You can scout free agents. You can make trades. You can play against rivals. It's absolutely awesome. You got to check it out. I was playing around on the app this morning, trying to put together my team. The Philadelphia Reds are in there, and we need some work to do. I'll tell you, I'm no Dave Dombrowski, because I ended up forgetting to sign a starting pitcher. And then we got into a little bit of trouble as we headed into the season. But man, it's fun to go ahead and try it out. You can compete against your friends. So download the app and check it out. And if you want to be better, then your friends will. You're going to be, because you're listening to Locked On. So Locked On Phillies listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using the promo code Locked On in the game store. So make sure to check it out. Download the game. Just go ahead and visit probaseballgm.com. Scan, and you can scan the code there, or you can just look it up on the app stores like I did. You just type in Ultimate Pro Baseball GM, and you can go ahead and download it from there. That's probaseballgm.com and Ultimate Baseball GM on the App Store. Start your dynasty today. So who's the most underrated Philadelphia Phillies role player? Or I guess you would call it the most poised for a breakout in the 2023 season. Let me just lay it out for you what this means. We know what Trea Turner is going to give us. We know what Kyle Schwarber is going to give us. Rhys Hoskins, JT Realmuto, guys like Bryce Harper when he comes back. Like Nick Castellanos, maybe not as much, but we have a general idea of what these top-level guys, the big names on the team, are going to do in a Philadelphia Phillies uniform. You have years of data at the major league level. They have years of experience. They're consummate professionals. They're getting paid millions upon millions of dollars because you can pencil them in for whatever their baseball card says, basically year in and year out. Some guys might have a slightly down year, slightly up year by their standards, but the stars are going to play like stars. That's why they're the stars. But sometimes, though, takes a team that's ready for a championship over the top is having that one guy who you didn't expect to break out have an outstanding year by their standards. Think about 2008, the last time the Philadelphia Phillies won the World Series. Was there a guy on that team that maybe like super exceeded expectations and never got back there and had an immaculate season that you weren't expecting? Oh, yeah, that Brad Lidge guy was pretty good when he went perfect in a closer's role and never came close to that again in his career. But he did it in 2008, and it was a huge reason why the Philadelphia Phillies won the World Series that year. So who's that guy this year? The guys I'm taking off the board in this conversation are Zack Wheeler and Aaron Nola, your top two pitchers, Bryce Harper, Trea Turner, Rhys Hoskins, JT Realmuto, Kyle Schwarber, and Nick Castellanos, all off the table. They're two biggest stars. They don't really fit into the nature of the conversation. But I'm talking about the guys coming off the bench, the guys that are barely making the team, maybe a fringe bullpen guy that you think is going to have a really good year. Who are those guys that are poised to break out? Now, for me, the guy I picked was Edmundo Sosa when I had this conversation this morning, because I think he's a guy that plays plus defense at multiple infield spots. They're teaching him how to play the outfield because they obviously value getting him in the lineup and trust him to do that. They trust his athleticism defensively, and they want to find a way to get him in the lineup. With only three true outfielders on this team right now, and you'll have either Jake Cave or Dalton Guthrie or both make the roster out of spring training, but Edmundo Sosa is probably the better professional hitter than either of those two. Like, you're looking at a guy that the organization really likes. They have team control over for a while. He's a young player who had some big moments last year. He's had a really nice spring. I know, going back to the Zack Wheeler conversation, that shouldn't really matter, but the swing looks good. I think what we saw of Edmundo Sosa last year was a flash of him figuring out major league pitching, preparing himself to hit at the next level, and I'm very interested to see what he does as the main utility guy for this team in 2023. Remember, he wasn't here for all of 2022. Got him from the Cardinals partway through the season. So what does Edmundo Sosa look like in a full season in a Phillies uniform? If he starts 30 or 35 or even 40 games if something happens with injury, what does he put up? I think he's poised for a big year. I think we're going to be looking back at the end of the season and say, hey, We liked Edmundo Sosa. Now we love Edmundo Sosa. But another name that kept coming up during that conversation on the air this morning on the radio was Derek Hall. And I'll tell you what, I don't think there's any doubt at this point that Derek Hall is on the opening day roster. He's got to be. He fits well as a DH. He's a left-handed power bat. He's had a really good spring. He had moments last year where he proved the lights weren't too big for him at the major league level. And then he kind of got exposed as you got down the home stretch. He didn't get a lot of playing time or anything really in the playoffs or whatsoever. And I get that, but he's still a young player. When you look at a guy that's going to hold you over until Bryce Harper gets back, though, and can DH basically every day, yes, against lefties too, even though he won't be as good against lefties. You got to throw him out there against lefties at point. But even if it's just against righty pitchers, pencil in Derek Hall as your DH, I think he could be in for a really big year. I think when he burst on the scene last year, he was very confident and very comfortable. He had like 3 home runs in his first 4 games in a Phillies uniform, and then kind of petered off as pitching figured him out. But remember, I talked about this with Brandon Marsh. I brought this up before with Bryson Stott. I brought this up with Alec Boehm. Same thing with Derek Hall. He's got another year with Kevin Long. He has an offseason with Kevin Long working on his stuff. I trust Kevin Long as much as I trust basically any other coach in this organization. Maybe as equal to Rob Thompson as far as trust in what he does. Not that I'd say Kevin Long could take over and manage and not miss a beat, but that in his role as hitting coach, I think he is as good as what Rob Thompson is as manager of this team. The guys seem to love him. They all talk about him. Derek Hall was actually on 97.5 The Fanatic this morning from down in Clearwater because our midday show is down there. And he was talking about Kevin Long and how he motivates the guys. And every time you talk to one of the Phillies hitters, they always bring him up. It's not a guarantee that teams do that. You'll hear hitters and they'll say, oh, I'm working through stuff, or I'm doing this, or I need to tweak that. And they won't directly credit the pitching coach or even directly mention them. No, the Phillies players all make it a point to bring up Kevin Long. I believe that he could really help Derek Hall become a guy that's a true power hitter at the major league level. Now, we'll see. It's a lot to do. He's got to take a big step from where he was at the end of year last year, but this is what we're talking about, a breakout year. And think about where this team goes. Let's say, I don't know, somebody in the infield like Bryson Stott. I'm not going to even bring up injury because last time I did that, Andrew Painter had an elbow issue. So let's say Bryson Stott struggles this year and Edmundo Sosa ends up starting 40 games at second base. If in those 40 games he bats .275 with 12 or 13 home runs and plays plus defense, that's something that other teams don't have the luxury of coming in when one of their top players are struggling. Or let's say Derek Hall is your opening day DH, and he ends up hitting 23 home runs this season as a DH. That's something that's extra that you don't account for on top of an already really good roster. That's what takes you from in contention for the NL East to winning the NL East, and a stacked NL East at that. So who these guys or which guys break out, or if anybody breaks out significantly, is going to be huge for this season. You make the case that Alec Boehm, as a power hitter, could break out. Bryson Stott may really come into his own as a fielder now that he's at second base. Brandon Marsh could hit, I don't know, he hit 288 since coming over to the Phillies last year. If he does between 280 and 290 this year at the dish, that's a breakout year for Brandon Marsh. That really helps the Philadelphia Phillies lineup. So there's so many options for possibilities, but let me know in the comments who you think the role player on the Philadelphia Phillies this year that's poised to break out is. Because whoever does could play a huge role in whether or not this team could win the division and how far they go in the playoffs. Coming up, we'll do a quick World Baseball Classic recap because we saw some fun stuff for some Phillies last night as we wrap up Locked On Phillies. Let's talk about my friends over at FanDuel. The NBA season's in full swing. We're coming down the home stretch. We got some really good games going on now, and this is the part of the season where teams are firing on all cylinders, trying to lock up their seeding for the playoffs. The Sixers, I know they're doing it. And now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because they're always firing on all cylinders, and new customers getting no sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. So let's say you bet, I don't know, the over on Joel Embiid points. You want him to score 35.5 or more, which you can't score half points, so 36 or more, and he scores 35. You're like, darn. Well, no, you could get up to $1,000 back in bonus bets. It's awesome. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scorers and threes drained, all that good stuff. So go ahead and check it all out. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same-game parlay. So don't miss the chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Last night in the World Baseball Classic, Team USA absolutely put a hurting on Team Canada. They beat the brakes off them. Absolutely. It was, 12-1? That's a good way to follow up a loss to Mexico. That's a good sign. And we got to see a sight that we've been waiting for. And we're still going to be waiting for, but it's a nice little taste of what we're going to see this year from your new shortstop. Trea Turner just absolutely nuked one late in that game. Hit a bomb to left field. If you had any doubts about how much power the guy can have as a speedy, rangy, defensively good, average hitting shortstop, well, that just shows you that he's a five-tool player. There's no doubts. Like, he got a breaking ball that he just absolutely hammered to left field. He's got such a sweet swing. It was effortless. It wasn't like he caught it well. Like, he hit it really, really well. But it wasn't like he had to absolutely – when, like, Ben Revere was here and he would absolutely muscle a ball, like square it up, perfect launch angle, everything like that. And it would be maybe if the wind was blowing out, it'd sneak into the first row. That ain't Trea Turner. This dude's got pop. I mean, we knew that already, but you saw it last night in the World Baseball Classic, and it makes you think about, how fun would that be to watch happen 25 times, maybe even more than that, at Citizens Bank Park this summer. That would be great. Just a leadoff home run from Trea Turner like that, or a big spot. Brandon Marsh gets on because he's hitting like between 280 and 290 in a breakout year, and then Trea Turner deposit one in the seats, and it's a 2-run lead for your Philadelphia Phillies. I just can't wait. JT Realmuto's been playing really well for them. Kyle Schwarber went yard in the first game that they had against Great Britain. So you're looking at a situation where the Phillies are showing up and showing out the World Baseball Classic. Mets players, not so much. If you watch the game against Mexico, yeah, Mets should work on their defense when they get ready for the regular season, because it's not going great for the Mets representatives at the World Baseball Classic. But either way, that's just a cheap shot at a division rival. Team USA won last night. It's a good thing for everybody involved. The Philadelphia Phillies that were involved looked really good doing it, and JT Realmuto and Trea Turner, who I was just talking about. So that's a good sign. If you haven't seen it yet, go back and watch Trea Turner's home run on repeat, and it'll get you hyped up for what he's going to do in a Philadelphia Phillies uniform this season. That's all for today's Locked On Phillies. I want to thank you for making Locked On Phillies your first listen every day. Free and available wherever you get your podcasts, of course. Now make your second listen checked out Locked On Fantasy Baseball. Can't talk today. Win your league by listening to Matt and Dom every day as they bring you the best fantasy draft strategies. Find Locked On Fantasy Baseball wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. So go ahead and check them out. Make sure you're rating, reviewing, subscribing on YouTube. I appreciate all that. Continue to do that as we head towards the season so you get all the latest updates, everything going on with your Philadelphia Phillies. And I will talk to you next time on the next Locked On Phillies.